Hello, hi. So good evening. We are meeting on a Wednesday evening and this is lecture 5 of genetics. So we are in the world of genetics. We are talking about the fascinating genetics. So we are together on this journey talking about molecular genetics, right? So today will be the last lecture of genetics. So we'll be talking about the regulation of gene expression. So far and so long, we have been talking about the central dogma of life. So what the central dogma actually consists of? So what it consists of? It consists of your DNA replication, transcription and translation, right? So we saw each of these processes in detail, how accurately, how precisely your cell ensures that these are done without any errors. And we also extended our lecture to see the experiments that was done behind all this. So what was the search for the genetic material? How did people conclude it is DNA and it was not RNA? So we discussed all those in the previous lecture as well. So today we'll end the world of genetics, especially molecular genetics, with this last topic, that is a regulation of gene expression. So a regulation of gene expression is pretty essential, because unless and until there's a regulation, unless and until there are rules, so nothing is going to be perfect, right? So everywhere there has to be some restrictions, some checkpoints, some gates to check if we are going in the right path. So similarly in your cell, so this central dogma of life is the most fundamental thing in your life, right? So it is the most indispensable process that can ever happen in your cellular world. So is the case, when such importance is given to this topic, your cell will definitely ensure that this happens in a regulated pattern. So for each step, it will think twice. Okay, so do I have to translate this protein? Is this protein needed now? Why it is needed? How much it is needed? So all that comes under this broad term, that is regulation of gene expression. So regulation of gene expression is an ocean as such. So regulation of gene expression, we do not know the entire thing that is present in nature. We only know what has been discovered in research today. So that research itself is a huge volume, and we can talk about regulation of gene expression for days together. But constricting it to 1 hour, then imagine how much just a small speck is what we're going to discuss today. But yet this small speck can give you a wide idea as to how your gene is precise in regulating its expression. Fine. So join me today's lecture. And it's the most interesting part of your central dogma of life, that is regulation of gene expression. So together we go forward. So before we go forward, I would like to introduce to you that we have a coupon code, that is KR10. So you can use this on our eCareer Point app to purchase any courses or any products with a 10% discount. Okay, so make sure you use this code and you enjoy the benefits of buying a product or buying a free course. Okay, so thank you in advance. Okay. So before we actually go into our topic, that is regulation of gene expression, so we are talking about genes, right? So we are talking about genetics. We are particularly focusing on molecular genetics. So I told you everything is based on your gene. Like we saw, if you're happy, it's based on your gene. If you're sad, it's also based on your gene. So now today I have another variant where again you can blame your genes. So how does this look? It looks so good, right? So all of us want to have a hot cup of coffee in the evening, especially on a rainy evening or on a rainy morning, right? So the aroma of the coffee, the fragrance that comes out of the coffee bean is mesmerizing. So it tempts you, right? It looks so appealing to you that you feel like having coffee, right? So especially if you're a South Indian, you're more tempted to having a filter coffee, right? So I understand, I can relate with you. So how much coffee is too much for your health? So is coffee good or bad? So this has been a debatable talk ever since. But how much coffee is good for your health? So that is a very relatable question. So always people say don't consume too much of beverages, too much of tea, and coffee is not good for health. So is it so? So how much coffee should we have? So what is the design behind this? What is the background behind this? So the first one is a specific variant of the gene, and that gene is called a CYP1A2. So it is this gene in your DNA that ensures your coffee metabolism happens perfectly. So if you're consuming coffee, right, so coffee contains caffeine, so your body has to metabolize your caffeine. So that is when you get that satiated feel. Okay, so when you're having a very bad headache, when you're having a bad day, a cup of coffee can cheer you up, because the secret is your caffeine. So for your caffeine to be properly metabolized, you need this gene variant. So when you don't have this gene working efficiently, it means that your caffeine is not being metabolized properly, right? At the same time, when you have this gene working properly, it means your body is able to metabolize your caffeine efficiently. Okay. So, but how much should you consume? Though this gene is working properly or not, but how much coffee is essential for you? So, I have a recommended amount of coffee that you can consume. It says 1 cup as containing around 75 milligrams of caffeine. It has a modest risk in cardiovascular diseases. So which means consume less than this. And also one more thing, the best way to consume coffee is to take out your sugar and take out your milk. So all you need is the caffeine, right? So just to ensure the caffeine is more tasty, you add all the extra ingredients. But if you really love coffee, if your love for coffee is true, ensure that you take caffeine in the purest form, that is your black coffee. Okay. So why is it advised? Because so when you have coffee early in the morning after you wake up, it tends to increase your blood sugar. So which is again a consequence in your later years where you will have BP. So having BP and living with it, it's not easy, right? So it can lead to blood pressure. So blood pressure can again lead to your cardiovascular diseases. So it is advised that you have coffee after your breakfast or on an evening. So on a rainy evening, you can definitely have coffee. That's no doubt. Okay. So, but this as such is a very interesting fact because all of us tend to have coffee and tea more, right? Fine. So now going forward, so what are the sequence of topics that we will be discussing today? The first one will be a quick recap of your central dogma of life. So don't worry, we have talked n number of times, so many lectures we have been discussing in revising your central dogma of life. So today it will be a very short recap. So then we'll actually enter into gene regulation because gene regulation has such as a lot to discuss. Fine. So apart from that, we'll see where at what levels your gene is getting regulated. Then principles of gene regulation and what basis your gene is getting regulated. And you have something called as operon and its type. So we'll look into the operons. So we'll talk about 2 operons here, lac operon and tryptophan operon. We'll talk about HGP. So have you ever heard what HGP is? Yes, so HGP is Human Genome Project. So we'll talk about Human Genome Project, which was one of the mega projects and it was a groundbreaking, breathtaking discovery in the field of genetics. Without HGP, today we couldn't even think of therapies for genetic disorders. So it is because of HGP that today we are very confident that at least in near future, we'll be able to treat genetic disorders. Fine. Last but not the least, we'll talk about DNA fingerprinting, how DNA fingerprinting has stark application in your present day life. Fine. Okay. So quick recap of your central dogma of life. So it's not new to us. We have spoken about this n number of times. So the first one is your DNA gets replicated. Once your DNA replicates, it gets transcribed. So your information in your DNA is copied onto your mRNA and your mRNA translates them to proteins, right? So we have studied in detail how each process happens, who are the players behind and what rules they hold to proceed with the process, right? So it should be pretty much clear. Now, going further, what is gene regulation and why are we going to talk about it? So before we actually go into gene regulation, so your subject genetics has a lot of players, so a lot of hero in our terms because you have so many scientists who have contributed. So without them, we wouldn't stand here talking about genetics so fluently, right? So what do Francis Jacob and Jacques Monod? So these two were very good scientists and they have very good discoveries. So we will talk about the discoveries later, but the quote that they said, the statement that they said has a very strong impact. So the statement says, the fundamental problem of chemical physiology and of embryology is to understand why tissue cells do not at all express all the time all the potentiates inherent in their genome. For those of you who find these 2 lines complicated, let me put it very simple. So we have thousands of genes in your body. At a particular time, say present moment, in my body and in your body, not all genes, not all proteins are being expressed. Only particular proteins and particular genes are being expressed. So that is why it is a mystery as to how your cell can do this. Okay, so that is what is being put into these 2 lines in a scientific way. So of 4,000 genes in your bacterial genome. So I mean to say your bacterial genome being the smallest of all, the prokaryote, it has 4,000 genomes, okay? Not 40,000. Sorry. And in human genomes, that is in you and me, we have at least 35,000 genes, but only a fraction of them is being expressed at this moment. So what is the mystery behind it? So what is the secret behind it? What is the magic behind it? So that is your gene regulation. Fine. So some gene products are present in very large amounts. So some okay. For example, certain things we almost need in day-to-day life. For example, in your kitchen, you have good stock of wheat and dal, because that is very important. But at the same time, look at the availability of Maggi at your place, it's less, right? So you know which is healthy, which is staple for you. So that you tend to purchase in a large quantity. So is your cell. So there are certain proteins which are present in large amounts in your cell. For example, your EFs are your elongation factors. So where did we talk about elongation factors? We're talking about elongation factors when we were talking about transcription and translation, if you remember. So these elongation factors that are involved in protein synthesis is always abundant in bacteria. Meaning there's no stage in the life of a bacteria where these elongation factors are very less. They are always present in abundant level. Fine? Okay. For example, these two enzymes, ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate carboxylase oxygenase, so which is commonly known as Rubisco in plants, is abundant in the biosphere, meaning it's always being expressed by your gene. So your gene knows which to express in high amount, which to reduce the expression or halt the expression of certain proteins or genes. Fine? Okay. So going forward, where this regulation happens, at what stage, at what level in your genome that this regulation happens. So that's what we are going to see. So the cellular concentration of protein is determined by a delicate balance of 7 processes. So you have 7 processes where this regulation can happen. Okay, so each potentiates the point of regulation. So we will talk about each of these processes in detail. So first one is the synthesis of your primary RNA transcript. So that is your transcription, right? Once the information from your DNA is copied onto your mRNA, so that is your primary transcript, right? Second one is post-transcriptional modification of mRNA. So once your mRNA is produced, you have post-translational modification, meaning your mRNA can be phosphorylated, it can be acetylated. So all these modifications, at the level of modification also you can have regulation. Fine? Third one is mRNA degradation. So once after your transcription, if your cell understands, okay, this mRNA is not stable, this mRNA will lead to a misfolded protein, it will ensure that mRNA is degraded. Fine. So fourth one comes in the process of translation. So first 3 comes in the process of transcription and post-transcription. So the fourth one, we are actually talking about the process of translation. Sometimes in the process of translation, your cell will realize, okay, maybe we are running short of one factor. So your translation process can be halted. It can be mistranslated as well. Fine. So post-translational modification is also one place. Protein targeting and transport. So we know protein has to be transported. So though your proteins are produced in your cytoplasm, because translation happens in the cytoplasm, proteins have to be transported. For example, the protein can be needed again into the nucleus. So this transport and target can also be the level of your gene regulation. Last but not the least is your protein degradation. Once that protein is no longer needed. For example, if it has been misfolded. So when we talk about biomolecules further, you will understand how the protein is architecture. So you have primary structure, secondary structure, and tertiary structure. Even if you have an imbalance in each of these structure, your protein will be degraded. So these are the 7 steps or 7 processes where your regulation of gene studies can be done. Fine. So I have a figure here. So your gene is being transcribed. So primary transcript. So this is your first area. Then it's being modified using post-translational process. So that is your second process. So let me quickly take a pen. So this is your first process. This is your second one. And your third one is mRNA degradation. Fine. Your fourth one is translation. Then you have post-translational processing. Then protein degradation. Then protein transporting and targeting. Fine. So these are the 7 areas where your gene can be actually regulated. Okay. So going forward, so what is the principle behind this gene expression? So do you have any idea what is the principle behind this gene regulation or who is regulating this? So looking forward to this, so I will introduce to you certain new terms before we actually talk about gene regulation and how it happens. So the first thing I would like to introduce to you is the housekeeping genes. Okay, so what do you mean by housekeeping genes? For example, housekeeping means they are always present. So who's keeping your house? Who is responsible for your house? Who has to be always be there? You and I, we may be insignificant, but our mothers are always needed, right? For every work of us, we need our mother. So we can say our mother is housekeeping because they are very, very essential to run the house, right? So housekeeping gene means gene expressed at more or less constant level in virtually all the cells and in all process. They have to be present always in a constant level, irrespective of the cell type and the cell activity that they perform. So the genes that are always present in certain amount in all the cells is called as housekeeping genes. Fine? So this unvarying expression of a gene, so they are present in constant level. So this unvarying expression of a gene is called as constitutive genes. Constitutive means they are always present. Fine. So housekeeping genes are certain genes in your body, so certain genes in your cell that are always present in certain amounts. So this unvarying expression is called as constitutive genes. Fine. So there are other terms. For example, there are gene products which will rise and fall in response to molecular signals. So that is regulated gene expression. So certain things are always present, but certain things with respect or with request to the demand from the signals, it will produce or it will stop the production. So you have those kind of products as well. So the gene products that increases in concentration under a particular molecular signal. So when you have a gene, for example, say you have a gene X. So you have a signal coming from outside, say Y. So Y is acting upon gene X and hence you have a protein produced. So you have increased concentration of protein produced. So such a kind of circumstance is called as inducible. So this gene product is inducible gene product. Fine. So the process of increasing their expression is called as induction. You understand what is inducible genes and what is induction? Okay. Now going forward. So gene products decrease in concentration in response to a molecular signal. So when they decrease, for example, you have a gene A, it's continuously producing protein B. You want to stop this. So you get an outside signal called Z, which will stop this production. So such a kind of genes are called as repressible genes and the process is called as repression. Is this understood? So here I have introduced to you 4 terms: housekeeping genes, constitutive genes, inducible genes and repressible genes. Is this understood? So these are the ways or the principles behind your gene regulation. So going forward, we'll now talk about operon. So what exactly is an operon? So have you heard about the term operon before? So I guess lacoperon, tryptophan operon are not new to you. But how do you actually define an operon? So that is more important. Sorry, I am going backward. Okay, so here I have a definition for you what an operon is. So the gene cluster, so you have so many genes clumped together. So that is called as a gene cluster. So gene cluster and promoter plus additional sequences that function together in regulation. When they are put together, you call it as an operon. Fine. So basically, I mean to say there are so many genes which code for a protein, and when they are put together with a common promoter, it is called an operon. For example, okay, so I have a gene. So this can code for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it can code for 5 different proteins. So here I have a common promoter. So you understand what is promoter? So promoter is a part of your transcription unit. So transcription begins at the site of your promoter, right? So all these genes are clumped together with a common promoter and they are called as operons. So operons that include 2 to 6 genes transcribed as an unit are common. For example, here I took 5. It can be 6 genes or it can be even 20 or more genes. Fine. So what are the types of operons? So we have so many types of operons. Your lac operon, tryptophan operon, arabidose operon, histidine, valine operon. So basically lac stands for lactose. So lactose is a disaccharide. The monosaccharide is glucose plus galactose. So lactose breaks down into glucose plus galactose. Okay. So tryptophan, TRP is tryptophan. So tryptophan is an amino acid. Histidine is also an amino acid. Valine is an amino acid as well. Arabinose. So it is a sugar common in plants. Fine. So all these has its own function and own unique way of action. But we're not going to talk about all of them. So again, it will take weeks for me to complete this chapter. So because we have so much to understand the logic behind them. So we always say human brain is more complex, but to understand what is happening inside our body, it takes years and years for us. Okay. So today we're not going to talk about all these. So it's not relevant to your NEET syllabus as well, but we'll discuss about lac operon in detail and we'll just look into how the tryptophan operon is. We'll just look into the overview of tryptophan operon. We won't go much in detail. Fine. Is this understood? So this is how your operon will look like. So you have a promoter region. So you have an operator region and then you have your structural genes. The structural genes are the one that I drew here. But apart from the structural genes, you have what is called as an operator. You will have a promoter and you will have a regulatory gene here. So this is how your operon is decided. Fine. Now going forward, we'll talk about lac operon. Okay, so this is the structure of your lac operon. So P stands for promoter. So I stands for inducer. O stands for operator. And these are your structural genes. Okay, is this understood? This is your lac operon. This is the design of your lac operon. So now let me explain you what happens. So lactose is a disaccharide, right? So it will be broken down into glucose plus galactose. What breaks down? So you again have an enzyme. The enzyme is called as beta galactosidase. Fine. So the normal sugar in your bacteria is glucose. So normally your bacteria will have access to glucose, but when it does not have access to glucose, when lactose is present in the medium, then your lac operon will come into picture. Fine. So this lactose, excuse me, so this lactose is always present in a minimal amount inside your cell. Okay, so this lactose will be transported inside so that it is being broken down. So here you have three structural genes, Z, Y and A. So Z codes for this enzyme beta galactosidase, Y codes for permease. So it helps in the permeation of your lactose, and A codes for trans-acetylase. So trans-acetylase helps in the transfer of acetyl group from acetyl-CoA. Fine. So why did I explain this? So going back to the previous slide, you have three structural genes. So if this operon has to be transcribed, so what will be the protein that you will get? You will get beta galactosidase here. So you will have permease here. And you will have another protein here, that is your trans-acetylase, right? So now if this has to be transcribed, now look at the condition. So this inducer will always be present, okay? So it will always transcribe a repressor mRNA and it will produce a repressor protein. So this always happens. This is constitutive irrespective of your presence of your lactose or glucose. So this will be active. This will produce a repressor mRNA and your repressor protein will be produced. Now, once it is produced, it will now check for the availability of your lactose. If lactose is present, that is another case. So that is case 2. But if lactose is absent, then there is no point in transcribing these proteins, right? So there is no point in transcribing these genes because it is waste of time and energy for your cell. If lactose is absent, then what is the need of these genes? So once your repressor is produced, it will go and bind to the operator. So once your repressor bind to the operator, your process of transcription will not happen because your RNA polymerase will not be able to access these genes. Okay, so in the absence of lactose, so your repressor will bind to the operator and it will block the regulation or transcription of these genes. Fine. Suppose if lactose is present, so again, irrespective of the presence or absence of lactose, your repressor mRNA is produced, your repressor protein is also produced. Suppose if your lactose is present, your lactose will come and bind your repressor. So your inducer here is your lactose. So once lactose is present, it will come and bind to the repressor. If it binds to the repressor, your repressor can no longer bind to your operator. So your RNA polymerase will transcribe these genes. Fine, is this understood? Okay, so you will have a lac mRNA. So this mRNA will have specific regions for these proteins. So it will produce beta galactosidase, it will produce permease, it will produce transacetylase, right? So thus you can have the breakdown of lactose, which is a disaccharide, into glucose plus galactose. Is this understood? Fine. So that was about lac-operon. Now tryptophan-operon is pretty more complicated, but I'm not explaining you all the genes. So just it's an overview. So understand your tryptophan repressor will produce a TRP repressor protein. Okay, so there is a gene TRPR, so tryptophan repressor. It will produce a repressor protein, and this repressor protein will bind with a tryptophan. Okay, so when a repressor protein binds with a tryptophan, it will have a conformational change and bind to the operator. Just like when you have a lactose, your lactose repressor will bind, right? But there, your repressor will not bind to the operator. Here, your repressor protein will bind with tryptophan. So you'll have a conformational change and then it will bind to the operator region and you will not have this transcription happening. This is in case of tryptophan. So there's a difference in each operon. In case of lac-operon, when lactose is present, the process of transcription has to happen because lactose has to be metabolized. But in case of tryptophan, if tryptophan is present, tryptophan will inhibit your transcription of your tryptophan operon. Fine, is this understood? Okay, so this is about tryptophan operon. Now, coming to the next topic of today, so that is the Human Genome Project or the HGP. So Human Genome Project was started in 1993 and it was ended in 2003. It was almost started in 1990 exactly and it was concluded in 2003. It was such a huge project, so it almost took 13 years. So what is this Human Genome Project? So you and I have a genetic material, that is DNA, right? So we have a genetic material. So this is made up of base pairs. So we have 6.6 into 10 to the power 9 base pairs. How do you know what is each base? For example, I am normal. You have a person A who is suffering from a disease. Okay, so you're not able to cure it with medicine. So what you do, you look into the DNA. If there's any change in the genetic material, because you and I are almost 99% identical. So your genome and my genome are 99% identical. We have the difference in the 0.1%. Okay, we are 99.99% identical. Okay, and the remaining 0.1% is where we are not identical. So almost everything should be the same, right? So now if you compare, if you know the normal genome sequence, you will be able to analyze or compare it with a deceased person. So to know the normal genome, so how your genome is designed, in what range your base pairs are arranged. So that is what your Human Genome Project is all about. Fine. So it was a mega project launched in 1990 till 2003. So you have a branch called bioinformatics where all the data, so the base pairs of each strand, for example, you have 6.6 into 10 to the power 9 base pairs. So what is the first base pair? What is the 33,000 base pair? So all that is stored in a system of software in your computer and that is called as bioinformatics. But what was the goal of HGP? So what did they look forward to find? So the first thing was they wanted to identify the 20,000 or 25,000 genes present in the DNA. So we have almost 25,000 genes present in your DNA, and they wanted to identify the genes. They wanted to determine the sequence. So sequence I mean as to with respect to your nitrogenous bases. So which base pair comes after which. Okay, in 3 million base pairs, this is in a haploid set. Then they want to store this information in a database. Then they want to improve tools for data analysis. They want to be more precise and transfer related technology to other sectors such as industries. So you will understand what these 2 points means when we talk about the conclusion of your human genome project. It also had led to the address of ethical, legal and social issues, because if you want to sequence the genome, you have to take DNA from someone. Whose DNA will you take? Because this human genome project is universal now. Okay, so you have one single database with which you will compare your sample. Okay, so this human genome project is the standard one and it is universal. So now when it's going to be universal, whose gene will you take? Will you take my gene, your gene, Trump's gene, Obama's gene? Whose gene will you take? So that is one of the legal, ethical and social issues, right? So how it happened was, when the human genome project was going to be started, so they put out advertisements, okay? So not advertisements actually, yes, they actually addressed to volunteers that we need your genome because we are going to sequence. So there were 5 people whose genome was taken, meaning whose DNA was studied. But till today we don't know whose genome was actually sequenced, and it is present as a universal standard reference for us. Okay, so once that is known, then we'll start saying ethical issues, legal issues, racist issues, country-wise issues, everything arises, right? So that is the reason. Fine, but how was it done? So it is easier being said than done, because if you take out DNA from your body, it becomes unstable. But how did you sequence 3 billion base pairs? How do you know in which order it is based pair? So it's amazing, right? Can you even imagine how it can happen? So nothing is visible to your naked eye. Then how do you think it'll happen? So what methodology did they follow? So they went ahead with 2 approaches. One was identifying all genes that are expressed as RNA. So they looked into genes that code for RNA. So they categorized them as expressed sequence tag. So that was one approach. The next approach was they sequenced the entire genome, and later they classified them as coding regions, non-coding regions, RNA coding regions, etc. So such a kind of approach is called as sequence annotation. So these were the 2 approaches or methodologies that was followed to study the human genome project. But how did you study? So, for example, if I say they studied your genome, they sequenced your genome. So, what is your imagination? Okay, so they took out genome and they just stretched it and they found out the sequence. No, that's not going to happen. So, this is not a fantasy world, right? I agree, miracles, magics do happen, but that is not such easy miracle and magic. So, we have to put in our efforts as well. First, you have a person. So say person A. So you will isolate his DNA. So how will you isolate the DNA of a person? You can take any cell. You can take blood cell. You can take hair. You can take teeth sample, any sample, and you can isolate DNA. Okay. So isolating DNA is not easy. Once you isolate DNA, your DNA tends to be very unstable. So you have only one copy of this DNA. So at the end of the process, you'll have only very little amount and not even purified DNA. You'll have proteins along with it. You have your metabolites along with it. So what you do is you make multiple copies of this DNA. So how it is done, you will put them inside a vector that is called as plasmids. So we have been talking about plasmids when we were talking about the cell, right? So they are extra chromosomal DNA material. So what will happen, you will put this DNA into the bacterial vector and you will let them replicate. Meaning you are producing clones of your DNA before actually studying them. Okay, so you are ensuring that you have enough copies before studying them, because experiments are usually trial and error basis. You can't always ensure you get a correct result at the end when you're talking about live cells. Okay, so one of the vectors that I used was bacterial artificial chromosome and yeast artificial chromosome. So from bacteria, you design a plasmid, because for the designing of a plasmid, you have certain criterias and your plasmid has to satisfy those criterias. So what are those criterias we'll talk about when we are talking about biotechnology, okay? As of now, understand the vectors used here are BAC and YAC. Fine? Okay. So I have a picture here. So let me show it to you in detail. So here you have a plasmid, you have a gene, okay. So this is your gene of interest. So this is the human genome, okay. So you have a bacterial plasmid, then you clone it, okay. So you clone it, your bacterial artificial chromosome. So this plasmid is not naturally present. So you are going to design the plasmid as well. So this plasmid will be first designed, and then it will be introduced into the bacteria, and the bacteria will produce copies of itself, because bacteria has the ability to replicate the plasmids. Fine? Okay. So next one is the salient features of your GHP. So what did they conclude with this finding? So 13 years long work. So what was the final conclusion? Was it useful? Was it a waste of time and resource? Because it was not easy to sequence per base pair. For example, if this is your DNA, to find A pairs with T at this position, it will cost you $3. Imagine we have 3 billion base pairs. So how expensive it should have been. So the first conclusion was the human genome had 3164.7 million base pairs. Average base pair is 3000. Sorry, this is 3000, but varies. The largest human gene is dystrophin. It has 2.4 billion bases. 99.9% nucleotide bases are exactly same in all people. So you and I have 99.9% nucleotide base same. Excuse me. Okay, so the functions of 50% of the genes are unknown. We found out genes, but we don't know what is their function. Okay, so less than 2%. So out of this entire so many billion base pairs, only 2% codes for proteins. So what was a talk so long? So we have been talking about central dogma, and we said the ultimate objective of your cell is to produce proteins, right? But when I say only 2% and the remaining 98% does not code for proteins, is it not really stunning? Okay, only 2% is coding for proteins. What is the remaining 98% doing? We don't know. We are still studying. What is the remaining 98% doing? Okay, so you have related sequences. You have some sequences which are definitely repeated. For example, if you have ATGC, again in some other place, again you will have ATGC. So these are called as related sequences and repetitive sequences. So chromosome 1 has the maximum genes and chromosome Y has the least number of genes. Fine. So here also they found out there's something called as SNPs. So SNPs are single nucleotide polymorphisms. For example, in a normal gene, if you have this base pair, in another gene, if you find this base pair, you will have change in one base pair. So if this is the standard one, and if in my genome you find this, so there's a shift in one genome, right? So that is called a single nucleotide base pair. It can be such that this also. So this is the standard reference. So a normal person should have ATG, but in my genome it's AGG. So there's a change here, right? It will ultimately change the way your mRNA is translated. So it's a triplet base pair. ATG is different, it codes for a different protein. AGG codes for a different protein. So they are this single nucleotide polymorphism which makes you and me different. So the last topic for today, that is DNA fingerprinting. It involves identifying differences in some specific regions in DNA sequence. So they are called as repetitive DNA. For example, there are certain sequences in your DNA which tend to be repeated in various patterns. So basically I told you only 2% codes for protein, remaining 98% are non-coding. So among the non-coding regions, you have some repetitive sequence, meaning the sequences, for example, 5 base pairs are again repeated, 5 base pairs are again repeated. So they are called as repetitive sequence. So a small stretch of DNA is repeated many times. So such a kind of repetition is called a satellite DNA. So if you ask me why this name satellite came, because when you were trying to separate the bulk genome from the non-coding regions, so the bulk genome formed a huge peak, and the other repetitive DNA, they formed a small peak as though it looks like a satellite to your bulk genome, and hence the name satellite genome. Fine, is this understood? So depending on the base composition, so what is the repeat sequence? For example, TA is the repeat sequence. So the maximum base here is A and T, right? So that is your base composition. What is the length of the segment? Here it is 5 base pairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? That is the length of the base pairs. Then the number of repetitive units. So how many times it is repeated? So based on that, they are classified into microsatellites and mini satellites. Fine. So this forms the basis of DNA fingerprinting, and DNA fingerprinting today is used in your forensic science to identify the crime scene, to identify who the criminal is. So you can do it with the help of your DNA as well. So this polymorphism arises due to variation. So you and I are different, but the HGP says, the Human Genome Project says you and I are 99.99% identical, and we are different in 0.01%. So that 0.01% is polymorphism, and that arises due to variation. Fine? Okay. Inheritable mutation is observed in population. So this is inheritable mutation. So it is observed in population at a high frequency. When this inheritable mutation is observed in a population at high frequency, we call them as DNA polymorphism. Fine. So, so take a sellotape. Okay. So apply ink on your thumb and put your sellotape on top and take out, leave it for some time and then take out your sellotape. So do the same with your brother or sister or your parents, your mother or father. Then observe the pattern of your fingerprint. So you and I will not have the same pattern. Even you and your mother will not have same pattern. So that is where your polymorphisms come into picture. Fine? Okay. So we have another sector here which is called as VNTR, variable number of tandem repeats. So these variable number of tandem repeats actually help in finding who the criminal is. So if you want to know this person X, for example, you have cases, right? So you don't know who's the father or mother of this child. So then you go for DNA fingerprinting. So whose ever chromosome matches with the child, so they are the parent, right? So it was a technique developed by Alec Jeffreys. So they use satellite DNA as probe. So they have very high degree of polymorphism, and that is called as VNTR. So for example, look here. So this child is C. So you want to know if she is the mother and she is the father, and with whom the child's DNA matches. So first you will take out the variable regions of your father and mother. So this is individual A, this is individual B. Say for example, you want to know who is the father of this child. So you have the first suspect here and you have the next suspect here. Fine. So whose ever chromosome matches closely with the child, so they will parent the child, right? So how it is being studied? First you will isolate DNA, you will then divide them, because you can't study the entire bulk genome. You will just divide them into small fragments using enzymes called restriction endonuclease. Once you have done that, you will transfer them to a blot. So I understand it's complicated for you to understand, but for now listen to this process. We'll talk about each of these processes in detail. So what you will do, you will isolate the genome, you will cut them with the help of enzymes so that you only want the variable regions, okay? So those variable regions are fragmented, okay? They are then transferred to a membrane. Once they are transferred to the membrane, you have VNTRs. So variable repeat regions, so they can be artificially produced. You try to match with them. So whichever matches with your chromosome, so whichever has more match, so that is called as, so though they become the father or parent of this child. For example, now look, your variable regions are selected, they are isolated, restriction and done. So once you look under the membrane, So these are the chromosomes of these two individuals. So this is the chromosome pattern of A and this is the chromosome pattern of B. Similarly for the child. Now you see the chromosome pattern of the child matches closely with that of a B. So B is the father or the important suspect. So you can say he actually fathered the child C. So this is how you identified with the help of DNA fingerprinting. So now even if I explain you in detail how it happens, it's going to be tough. For example, you take the DNA, your DNA is pretty long, but you need only essential regions like this. So you cut them with the help of enzymes. Okay, so even when you cut, they remain in the same position. You have to push the smaller pieces down. So you do what is called as gel electrophoresis. So once your DNA is pushed down in the presence of an electric field, you make sure they are imprinted on the membrane. Okay. Now you have VNTRs, so they are labeled probes. So you have outside your this box, you have VNTR. So they have sequences carrying the sequences of your child. So this can be artificially made. First you'll sequence this and find the base sequences here, and you'll artificially produce a VNTR. Now, if this sequence has a complementary base here, it will go and bind. So here the child's DNA matches with that of an individual B's DNA. So there you will have more matching, and that's how you find out the suspect here. Fine, is this understood? Okay. So I have few questions for you. So let's quickly solve, because we are done with the world of genetics, that is molecular genetics. Now let's quickly solve some questions and see if we are in sync with what I am talking. So satellite DNA is a useful tool. So where did we talk about satellite DNA? So they basically repeat sequences. They are an important tool in DNA fingerprinting. Fine. The next one, the functioning of the structural gene is controlled by. So when we were talking about operon, especially a lac operon, you had three structural genes, right? Who controls them? Either your inducer or your operator. So your inducer or operator, they are called as regulatory genes. Okay. So what is the basis of DNA fingerprinting? SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms. Since you have that single variation in your entire genome, you are able to identify that 0.1% difference between you and me. Is this understood? So these were the quick revision. So these three questions literally sums up what we spoke today. Okay. So with this, we are done with genetics. So thank you for being patiently staying with me and listening to all the lectures. And sometimes I would have ended up talking redundant times about the same topic. So bear with me, and I'm really grateful that you shared the session with me. But stay back, stay tuned. I will come back with more interesting topics, more interesting facts, and I promise to make the lecture more interesting. And we are talking about the story of life on Earth, and that's biology. So now make sure you like, share, and subscribe my page. So thank you so much for joining me, and this is me signing off. Thank you.